Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to the special meeting of December 18th at 6 p.m. Bienvenue à cette réunion. I'm Stephen Erdely. I'll be acting as chair in a moment. We'll be officially appointing me as acting chair for the meeting as the mayor is unavailable for this evening. First, I'll go around and introduce my fellow councilors. We have with us Lior Azarad, Andy Schuster, Oren Sabag, Mitch Kajavsky, Sydney Benizli. We have our city manager, Jonathan Schechter, Mike Cohn, and we have Pascalie Tanguay, notre directrice des services juridiques, et André Rafossi, notre directeur de finances et trésorier. And we also have Daryl Levine, our director of communication with us. So at this point, I'll ask Councillor Sabag for a resolution to appoint me as the chair for this meeting.
I'd like to move a resolution to allow Councillor Stephen Erdely to chair the special meeting tonight.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Kajowski. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Thank you. Carried unanimously. At this point, I'll ask Director Levine to do our land acknowledgement and information on the question period. Go ahead.
Justice, devoir du souvenir, liberté culturelle et inclusion sont des valeurs chères à la ville de Côte Saint-Luc. Nombre de nos résidents et leurs descendants ont construit leur vie ici, après avoir fui des situations difficiles ailleurs. Le Canada a été leur refuge. Mais pour les peuples et les communautés autochtones, les politiques gouvernementales au Canada ont créé des injustices. L'île de Montréal, où nous sommes réunis aujourd'hui, porte un nom beaucoup plus ancien, Chauchagay. C'était un lieu de rassemblement historique pour de nombreuses communautés autochtones. C'était aussi un lieu de diplomatie, où a notamment été signé le traité de la Grande Paix de Montréal. Nous remercions la nation Ganyugeaga, également connue sous le nom de nation Mohawk, pour son hospitalité sur un territoire non cédé. Nous devons reconnaître le passé, afin d'avancer avec un esprit de collaboration et de réconciliation. Justice, remembrance, cultural freedom, and inclusion are important values to the city of Côte Saint-Luc. Many residents and their descendants have made their lives here, having fled dire conditions elsewhere. Canada was their refuge. But for Indigenous peoples and communities, government policies in Canada created injustice. The island of Montreal, where we are meeting today, has a much older name, Chauchagay. It was a historic gathering place for many Indigenous communities. It was also the site of diplomacy, including the Great Peace of Montreal. We thank the Ganyugeaga Nation, also known as the Mohawk Nation, for their hospitality on unceded territory. We must acknowledge the past so that we can move forward in a spirit of collaboration and reconciliation.
And now we'll move to the information on question period.
La ville de Côte Saint-Luc permet aux résidents et aux non-résidents de poser des questions en français et en anglais lors des séances du conseil. Toute personne souhaitant poser une question doit, au début de la séance du conseil, remplir le formulaire à cet effet qui se trouve à l'entrée de la salle du conseil. La période de questions d'une séance du conseil est limitée à 30 minutes, mais elle peut être prolongée sous réserve de l'approbation de la majorité des membres du conseil présent. Compte tenu de cette limite de temps et du souhait de permettre au plus grand nombre possible de personnes de poser des questions, chaque personne dispose de 3 minutes pour poser une question et une question de suivi au maire. Avant de poser une question, chaque personne doit indiquer son nom complet. Après la discussion des points à l'ordre du jour, il y a une deuxième période de questions. Au cours de cette deuxième période de questions, les participants peuvent uniquement poser des questions sur des points à l'ordre du jour. Finalement, personne ne peut utiliser un langage violent, offensant ou irrespectueux lorsqu'il adresse une question au maire. The Côte Saint-Luc City Council allows residents and non-residents to ask questions at its council meetings, in French and English. Every person wishing to ask a question in person must, at the beginning of the council meeting, fill out a question period form, which can be found at the entrance to the council chamber. The question period at a council meeting is limited to 30 minutes, but may be extended, subject to the consent of the majority of members of council present. Given this time limit, and given the desire to allow as many questioners as possible to ask questions, every person has 3 minutes to ask one question and one follow-up question to the mayor. Prior to asking a question, every person must state their full name. Following the discussion of the council agenda items, there is a second question period. During the second question period, attendees can only ask questions about items on the council agenda. Finally, no person may use violent, offensive, or disrespectful language when addressing a question to the mayor.
All right. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. So we'll start with questions that were submitted. So there was one question that was submitted by a resident. The question was from Lee Wise, resident of Côte Saint-Luc. It was actually subdivided into several questions. So what I'll do is I'll try to answer. I'll do question, answer, question, answer. I should say some of them I was not crystal clear, but what I will try to do is reach out to Mr. Wise and follow up on some of them because I wasn't 100% where he wanted to go with some of these. But I'll read the first question. It's related to pickleball. How much did you budget for this overall, including purchase, delivery, install, and storage for the current budget year? So this was a capital investment project in terms of the pickleball courts. The cost was approximately $132,000. It's difficult to break it down, but the majority obviously was for the purchase of the equipment, and it's about $4,000 for the setup and $4,000 for the takedown. In terms of next question, how much revenue did it generate? In 1 year, the average was approximately $1,200 per week, keeping in mind that it was only open for 14 weeks from July to mid-October. And this is also noting that most members at the time were able to access and use the pickleball courts with their fun card. In terms of what was the budget overall versus actual for profit loss. So in terms of the pickleball, it was actually a pilot year. So truthfully, we had very little expectations. So it was difficult to fully assess. But I would say it's something we're going to better analyze in terms of the upcoming year, 2024. Was there damage receipts of anything? If so, what did you do about that? So what happened was we had ordered 6 rolls. One of the rolls was damaged, and the company is sending us a replacement. Was the space miscalculated and costs wasted because of that? So in this point, there wasn't a miscalculation. Originally, the thought was to have 6 courts. What was realized actually was it's probably better designed for 5. What we realized over time was that we could fit 6 courts, pickleball courts, in the annex. For those of you who've been in the annex, and I didn't have a chance to play, but I was there to visit. It's a bit tight with 6, so with 5 it actually is better. But it's either way, we're going to be getting the replacement, and then we'll decide for this coming summer whether to go with the 6 or the 5. What is the budget for the new year for this? In 2024, we anticipate expenses to be approximately $40,000. This includes attendance at 14 hours a day. This includes the $8,000, again, the $4,000 install and takedown times 2, and some other miscellaneous expenses of approximately $3,000. We should also mention that the rates have increased, and we'll talk a bit more about this when I present the budget, but we've increased the rates for pickleball users. So it's an add-on to the Fun Card, or sort of a Fun Card Plus, and this will allow residents to use the pickleball court moving forward. Next question, also from Mr. Wise, is related to Rembrandt Park. Were wrong ones installed and corrected with a new one? At what cost? So I wasn't crystal clear what he was referring to, but I believe he's talking about the basketball nets at Rembrandt Park. From what I understand, there was nothing wrong with the initial install, so no correction required. However, the backboards were upgraded from a wooden or metal type to a plexiglass blackboard, which is better in terms of noise. It's also looks nicer. I know that's the way the newer nets are being done. And the cost, from what I understand, was approximately $7,000 for the new backboards. And I should mention, the previous ones were repurposed and used for other parks within the city of Côte Saint-Luc, so nothing was wasted. In terms of the ACC, actually, I'm not sure. Oh, here. Sorry, these are questions more related to the ACC. Why is it being closed during the holidays? How much money is that really savings? And why couldn't this money be found through cutting CapEx or other areas? So this one is one I'll answer briefly, but I would say the answer will come more when we present the budget. So this is an interesting one we looked at, and actually I have the printout of the days. So we looked at the dates in which the city facilities were closed. So I should mention, in terms of winter break as an example, the city facilities are still open. So for example, the arena, the library, the annex, the ACC are open still on many days. But we looked at, and I spoke to our director of HR about this earlier today, on a statutory holiday, it's either time and a half or double time. So it's quite expensive to maintain. And this year, the goal was to try to find ways to save some funds and minimize the tax increase, which I'll be talking about a bit more in a few minutes. So in terms of cost savings, the goal was to look at savings across the board. We generated about $500,000 of savings in what we call nice to have. And the goal there was to find elements that had the least amount of effect on the residents of Côte Saint-Luc. In addition, we cut another approximately $500,000 in staffing. Most of that was through not replacing hires or basically some seasonal or auxiliary workers to bring them in for a few less hours. But the goal there again was to save funds and try to find creative ways in a sustainable way. And finally, just to go back to why couldn't it be found by cutting CapEx? So CapEx works a little differently. So we have to separate our operating budget and CapEx. Although I should mention, on the CapEx side, we are hit with the extra interest costs, which has affected us, not just us, but residents, of course, throughout the city. On a personal note, I can share, as are many of you, I'll be renegotiating my mortgage this year and hoping that the interest rates will go down. I know for the city as well, we're hoping interest rates go down, because every year we renegotiate our own bonds, our own payments and interest on loans. And obviously it's caused, and I think the mayor said it well, that we have to look at what kind of vacations we're doing for the city, or look what we're spending on it, to try to be a bit more frugal and save money to reduce the effect in terms of taxes. As we know, residents are having difficulty already paying their own mortgages. So I believe, I'm just checking. So I believe that's it for the email, the questions that were submitted. I'm just checking in terms of so there were no questions from the public. So in that case, I will begin the presentation of the budget, and we'll take some questions later on if they are. So I'm just gonna set up my slideshow. And Daryl, you'll just let me know if it's sharing correctly. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Give me 1 second. Now you'll let me know if it's sharing correctly. Perfect. So I'm just looking at the time. The goal will be to do the presentation in about 40 minutes or so. Je vais essayer de prendre à peu près 40 minutes. Je vais faire la présentation mélange. I'll do one slide in English, après un diapo en français. And I hope everyone will be able to follow along. And s'il y a des questions après, on a notre trésorier qui peut m'aider aussi. So again, what we'll be presenting today is our 2024 operating budget and capital investment budget. This year, I should mention, we're doing our 5-year plan, although the focus will be on the upcoming year. So here's a brief outline of the presentation. So I'll begin with the budget process and guiding principles. We'll do the overview. Next, I'll be talking about some of the operating budget details, looking at the local versus the quote-par and the revenue and expenses. Then I'll be talking a bit about municipal property, water, road reserves and taxes in terms of the rates, the capital investment projects, and for in terms of the next 5 years and the priorities for this year, and questions as well at the end if there are any. Alors, cela, c'est le processus budgétaire. On a commencé en mois de mai et juin avec une révision des prévisions. En juillet, on avait une consultation pré-budgétaire et le but, c'est d'avoir cette consultation quand c'est pas trop tard. Par exemple, aujourd'hui, si des gens ont des questions, c'est difficile parce qu'on adopte le budget ce soir. On a continué en mois de novembre, on a examiné les projets d'investissement et en décembre, en termes d'examen du budget fonctionnement, et on est ici au mois de décembre en termes d'approbation des budgets. In terms of the guiding principle, I won't read through all of them, but just in summary, a few key points. Though the goal is to find that perfect balance between revenue and expenses. We look at our property tax to cover the operating expenses, and again, trying to minimize the additional burden on taxpayers. When we look at new programs, we try to make sure they're financially sustainable because we know there's sometimes hidden costs as well. We're also trying to leverage internal funding in terms of what we call our working fund in order to reduce debt service. And we're also looking at more funding through the federal and provincial government in terms of grants, and we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later in the presentation. And I guess just to mention one or two more in terms of efficiency and transparency, the goal is to share more, and the budget is posted. C'est déjà publié sur le site web, je pense. Oui. So the budget is already posted on our website. Over the next few days, we'll have more information posted. And in terms of the budget will be sent to every home, to every apartment in Côte Saint-Luc in early January, and the tax bills and tax flyers will go out later in the month of January. And finally, the key is budget monitoring. And this is a commitment that we have in terms of controlling the budget. And I'll say this year, we really took the time to look at what were our core services, what were the essential items, and what were nice to have. And this was not a simple exercise. And I want to call out my fellow councillor, Leor Azarad, who was really, really helpful in terms of the process, making sure we did that analysis, along with our city treasurer, and of course, the entire team of directors who gave their advice and input on this. Je vais continuer avec la différence entre les services locaux et les services de COPA ou les services d'agglomération. En termes de services locaux, il y a par exemple les travaux publics, le déneigement, gestion des déchets, loisirs, bibliothèques. Et en termes de services d'agglomération, il y a par exemple la police, sécurité, incendie, cour municipale, transport public, centre d'urgence 911. Alors, c'est les taxes que les résidents paient à la ville de Côte Saint-Luc qui sont pour les services locaux, et à peu près 40% des taxes vont aux services d'agglomération. So in terms of the operating budget, we're going to talk a bit about the revenue or the money coming in and the expenses, the money going out. And of course, the goal is a balanced budget, which we, of course, we are budgeting for. En termes de vue d'ensemble, alors l'augmentation de taxes municipales pour une maison résidentielle moyenne, alors ça inclut les maisons, les condos, les maisons de ville. La moyenne, c'est 5,95. Alors, il y a bien sûr celles qui sont plus hautes et celles qui sont plus bas, et c'est le même niveau d'augmentation que l'année passée. En termes de revenus provenant des taxes, l'augmentation, c'est de 5,47%. Une des plus grands attentes ou inquiétudes qu'on avait cette année, c'est la diminution des droits de mutation. C'est à peu près 1,4 million de dollars. Normalement, dans les années précédentes, on recevait entre 4 et 8 millions de dollars revenant des droits de mutation. Cette année, on est à peu près à 2,5 millions de dollars. Alors, c'est une diminution qui était difficile pour nous pour cette année et sera difficile encore pour l'année prochaine. En termes d'augmentation de revenus, c'est à peu près une augmentation de 5,66%. Augmentation des dépenses locaux, c'est juste un peu plus haut que 1 million de dollars, et c'est une grande partie parce qu'on avait mis des coupures en termes des services qui n'étaient pas essentiels et aussi en termes de ressources humaines. En termes d'augmentation de la quote-part, c'est à peu près 1,8 million de dollars, qui est une augmentation de 5,5%. En termes d'augmentation de dépenses totales, en termes de, qui inclut les remboursements en capital et affectation de local et de l'agglomération, c'est à peu près 5,66 encore. Et on a certaines augmentations qui sont liées à l'inflation. Par exemple, le déneigement, ça causait une augmentation de à peu près 400 000 dollars, paiement d'intérêt à peu près 24% et distribution de l'eau, qui est encore un peu plus haut. Et juste pour vous dire, la maison ou la personne moyenne à Côte Saint-Luc utilise à peu près 500 litres d'eau par jour. Alors, c'est un grand chiffre, un gros, et le but avec avec les lois qu'on vient d'adopter, c'est de diminuer cet montant de 500 à 460, 450, et ça va causer une diminution en termes de coût de l'eau aussi. In terms of the evaluation role, so this is the second year of a 3-year role. The role was announced in September of 2022, coming into effect on January 1st. So we're in the second year, and again, just to remind residents, we spread the increase over 3 years, and this is most beneficial, of course, to those who are well above, and I would say it sort of affects also those who are well below. But the goal was to lessen the effects over the 3 years, and this is something we've done generally. We're still good in terms of sharing? Okay, I thought I saw something. In terms of increases, so the average Côte Saint-Luc property increased by 37.8%, which is higher than the average in Montreal, or on the island of Montreal, which was 32.4%. And this is what has caused us difficulties. And what we saw in the previous role was our evaluation, our average increase in terms of the evaluation was less than the average for the island of Montreal. And this is something that will continue to be an effect on us. And I know it's one that the Association of Suburban Mayors is working on in terms of the demerged cities, dealing with Montreal, to try to minimize this effect, because it'll continue to be an issue for us moving forward when the next rule comes into effect on January 1st, 2026. Ici, on peut voir les moyennes en termes de tous les villes diffusionnées et la ville de Montréal. Alors, on peut voir qu'à Côte Saint-Luc, on est à peu près à 32, à Côte Saint-Luc, on a 37,8. Pour l'agglomération, 32,4, et même on peut voir pour la ville de Montréal, c'est même moins que ça. Alors, parce qu'on a 5% plus haut que la moyenne, ça a causé des augmentations pour les résidents ou les citoyens de Côte Saint-Luc qui sont plus hauts que la moyenne de l'île de Montréal. So again, in terms of the increase, so we see for the average residential home, so this includes houses, condos, and townhouses. The increase was 38.9%. For single-family homes, it was slightly higher at 41%. Condos a bit less. Duplexes and apartments was just below the average. And of course, non-residential properties only increased by about 30%, which also meant a shift for this tax roll, or this evaluation role, from non-residential slightly to residential properties. And again, spread over 3 years. Ici, on peut voir l'effet de taxe, l'effet de l'évaluation foncière pour une maison moyenne. Alors, au 1er janvier 2022, c'était 545 000 $. Après, avec le nouveau montant, c'était 757 000. Mais vous pouvez voir, on est dans la deuxième année. Alors, pour le 1er janvier 2024, l'évaluation taxable pour une maison moyenne à la ville de Côte Saint-Luc sera à 686 333 $. And again, here, this is showing you the average increase in taxes for an average residential home, and again, including houses, condos, and townhouses. And the average increase is 5.95%, again, comparable to last year And again, I'll explain a bit more detail as we go through the budget. And this, I should mention, I'll just mention, this includes the municipal taxes, includes the water reserve and the road reserve, so including all the different elements in the tax bill. C'est pour la maison unifamiliale moyenne qui est un peu plus élevée. Alors, l'hausse ou augmentation de taxes pour la maison unifamiliale moyenne, ça sera de 6,79% en termes de l'année 2024. Now we'll continue with the revenues. On va continuer avec les revenus. Alors, on commence avec les revenus en général. Alors, on peut voir en termes de les revenus provenant de taxes, et ça inclut le montant pour les services locaux et de l'agglomération. Il y a une tarification qui a été faite l'année passée, c'est pour les piscines, et c'était quelque chose de nouveau qu'on vient de commencer l'année passée. On peut voir en termes de compensation en lieu de taxes, le quatrième point, c'est 1,6 million de dollars. Et ça, c'est pour les immeubles du gouvernement fédéral et provincial, les écoles, les hôpitaux et tout ça. I'll continue with the estimated revenue from taxes. So here you have a breakdown. The total tax revenue is $76 million. And you can see the breakdown in terms of residential properties, again, based on the 5.95% increase. Note that we do have a small reserve for contestation. Most of the contested properties have been resolved in the current year in 2023. There's still a handful that we're waiting on. So as such, we've kept another reserve there for people who have contested their valuation. Le prochain, c'est en termes de revenus des taxes d'amélioration locale et des tarifs. Alors encore, il y a le tarif pour les piscines, taxes d'amélioration locale et compensation pour services municipaux. Ça, c'est pour les immeubles qui sont exemptés de taxes. Alors, c'est une petite augmentation versus l'année passée. The next one is other revenue. So you could see some of the more significant increases. So I'll talk about the recreation and library and culture activities. So this is an increase in recreation revenue due to new tariffs. So as mentioned, there's been an increase in certain elements. So one is, for example, the fun card. So the increase for the fun card this year is about 14%, but we've also added an extra fee for those residents who are opting for pickleball. And I'll just explain how this works. So the added fee, and I understand this is a bit of a controversial one for those who are pickleball lovers, but the goal is to find a way to cover some of the costs. So the pickleball add-on for an individual is $70. For a couple, it's $125, and for a family, $175. So this is on top of the fun card fee. Well, we haven't figured out the exact title, but probably something to the effect of Fun Card Plus. And so if someone is paying per use, it's about $10. So you can imagine if you're going 7 times for an individual, so let's say 12 times for a couple and about 17, 18 times for a family, then it's worth it to do this add-on. And again, the goal is to cover the cost. This is something new. And I guess the next one I'll mention again is the property transfer duty. So that is note 2 on the page. As mentioned, the previous few years, we are in the vicinity of $4 to $8 million. And I mentioned this to Councillor Cohn the other day, even in 2020. And I recall sitting with the treasurer at the time, Angela Marino. And, if you think back to March, April, May, June, July of 2020, people were not allowed to have open houses. Everyone was on lockdown. And I remember thinking we are going to not hit the budget and we are going to end up in a deficit. And that year, in spite of that, we still ended up with more than 4 million, about 4.4 million in transfer duties. And yet this year, due to the increase in interest rates, we've seen a significant drop if I compare to last year, we're at 8 million, this year 2.5 million, and even compared to the budget of 4 million. So it's something that is going to hit us, and we hope like I said earlier, we hope that interest rates will go back down for the city and for many of us, I'm sure, on a personal level. I mean, the only thing I will say just on the flip side, in terms of revenue, so the interest is actually costing us more in terms of our loans, but it also is generating more in terms of interest. What the city does when we have extra funds that are not necessarily used, we will sometimes put it in short-term GICs or term deposits. So the only nice thing I would say is we're able to generate more revenue on the interest, but we're also paying more interest on our loans as well. And I guess the other big one, which we'll talk about on the next slide, is the government grants. So I'll keep going. Le prochain, c'est en termes des transferts et subventions gouvernementales. Alors, le montant qui est le plus grand, c'est la pacte fiscale avec le ministère des Affaires municipales et de l'Habitation. Ça a augmenté de 546 000 à 1,8 million de dollars. Et l'augmentation, c'est dû au pacte fiscal et c'est dû aux taxes, le QST, le taxe de service, et il y avait un changement en termes de le formula avec les villes et la province qui nous a aidés. Et je voulais aussi parler un peu des redevances et reçus Québec. Cette année, par exemple, on a reçu 612 000 dollars en termes de redevances et reçus Québec. L'année passée, c'était 500. L'année passée, en termes de 2022, c'était 527 000. Et c'est à cause de notre taux de détournage qui continue à augmenter. En termes de tonnage, par exemple, cette année, ou pas cette année, en 2022, il y avait 241 kg par personne par année de déchets. Et l'année avant ça, c'était 2055. Alors, chaque année, on continue à réduire le montant, le nombre de kilogrammes par personne qui sont dans le déchet. Et nous espérons que ça va continuer pour l'année prochaine aussi. I'll continue with this is the general revenue breakdown. So in terms of revenue, you could see for the city of Côte Saint-Luc, and this is true for, I would say, all the demerged cities on the island of Montreal and for the city of Montreal as well. The vast majority, about 85% of our revenue comes from taxes, about 15 or 14.57% comes from other revenues, including fees and tariffs and so on. On va continuer avec les dépenses maintenant. So in terms of some of the external factors and risks, again, I won't go through all of them, but just to mention a few. Obviously, the agglomeration is one of the biggest one. We're dealing with not just the fees, but also the last few years, we've been paying the deficit for agglomeration from years gone by, which is not a simple one not a simple pill to swallow. In terms of climate change, we see issues in winter and summer conditions. As a simple example, we're spending more on salt than we've spent in the past because of the swings in terms of temperature. And today is a perfect example. We are December 18th, and it's warm outside and raining as opposed to snow. And we can imagine in the next few days when this freezes, we'll have to spend a lot more on salt to deal with it. In terms of competition for tenders, water main breaks, it's something that we continue to deal with. Inflation and interest rates, of course, causing issues. Real estate conditions, which we talked about, demographics and lifestyle, and technology trends. What we see, of course, is residents want more in terms of technology, and the city has to continuously adapt. And just as a mention, residents who are interested can access their tax bill online. I do it every year, so we encourage you, if you're interested, you can go to our city website and read more about that. En termes de pourcentage des dépenses locaux contre les dépenses d'agglomération, alors c'est à peu près 58-59% de dépenses locaux et locales et 41,5% des dépenses d'agglomération. So I'll go over the general summary of our local expenses. So what we can see is we've managed to keep the rates or the increase in terms of our expense quite low. If we just look at the top portion, including our general admin, public safety, public works, and so on, the increase is about 1.5%, and we'll actually go through them section by section in a moment, and you'll see some were actually a decrease in terms of expenses. On the CMM and debt service and financing costs, again, a significant increase, and most of that is linked to the interest rates for an overall increase of 2.8%. En termes d'administration générale, je vais juste parler un peu des grandes augmentations, de grands changements. Alors ici, il n'y a pas beaucoup à dire, sauf que on a une diminution en urbanisme. C'est partiellement à cause du master plan qu'on avait dépensé un peu plus d'argent dans le budget de 2023. Aussi, on a vu que s'il y avait une personne qui a pris, monsieur ou madame qui a pris son retraite, on essaie de ne pas réembaucher ou trouver quelqu'un de nouveau. Et en termes de nos travailleurs saisonniers, on a aussi essayé de diminuer les heures un peu. Je vais donner certains exemples dans une minute. In terms of emergency medical services, public security, and BCOP, so the goal here was to maintain services as much as possible and not to diminish, especially now is a time we know that there's a need for more public security and public safety in the city of Côte Saint-Luc. En termes des travaux publics, on peut voir certains départements, il y avait des augmentations, certaines des diminutions. J'ai parlé avec la directrice des ressources humaines et on a vu qu'il y avait certains employés qui n'étaient pas dans le département correct. Alors, on fait des changements pour régler ça. Mais en termes des augmentations les plus grands en général, c'est, comme je disais tout à l'heure, c'est en termes de déneigement. On peut voir ça a augmenté de 2,8 millions à 3,2 millions. Alors, une augmentation d'à peu près 400 000 $. Et c'est à cause de l'inflation qu'on a ce problème. I'll continue with environmental services. So here too, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing an issue in terms of our water purchase. Like I said, we are using about 499, about 500 liters per person per day. I should say it's less than the peak. If I go back a few years, I was looking at some of the data. At its peak a few years ago, we were up to 858 liters per person per day. So we're down to about 500. But again, the goal is to go even lower. Now, that was at a time where that was a year we had several water main breaks, which I think is a factor. But we're hoping with the new bylaw that was adopted recently, we'll see a reduction there. And I guess I'll just mention, I guess in terms of water, the cost of water in general going up. And again, this is purchased from the city of Montreal, from the agglomeration. En termes de loisirs et culture, on peut voir en total, il y a une diminution d'à peu près 5%. Alors, on a fait certains changements. On a diminué les heures d'ouverture pour le ACC, pour le centre culturel aquatique. Alors, par exemple, lundi et mardi, on ferme à 10 heures. Mercredi et jeudi, on va fermer à 9 heures. Et vendredi, samedi et dimanche, ça va fermer à 8 heures. En termes de gymnase, les heures restent les mêmes. Aussi, ici, avec quelqu'un qui a prend son retrait, on a essayé de ne pas les remplacer. On a aussi fait des changements, par exemple, pour les événements spéciaux. Par exemple, le Fête du Canada. Au lieu d'avoir des feux d'artifice, on va avoir un laser show. Je ne sais pas comment dire en français. Mais un spectacle de laser cette année, au lieu d'avoir des feux d'artifice. Cette année, le but, c'est d'essayer de dépenser un peu moins de dollars pour aider, pour voir que l'augmentation de taxes soit un peu moins élevée aussi. In terms of the library as well, so here we see a reduction of 3%. So here too, there's a we are going to be closing the library a little bit earlier. So I'll just mention, so in terms of the closing times, from Monday to Thursday, it'll be closing, it'll be basically from 10 to 9 instead of 10 to 10, Friday and Saturday from 10 to 6, and again, Sunday from 10 till 9. I should mention that even with this, the library is still open 71 hours a week, which is more than any other library on the island of Montreal. So we're continuing to do that. And I should mention the other thing, as I talked about earlier, was closing on certain statutory holidays. And I'll just add a point. Part of this, I have to say, was done for financial reasons, but part of it was done for HR reasons as well. It is becoming very difficult to find staff, especially staff to work on these statutory holidays. So I would say it's not a simple one. I understand there's residents who use these services on those days, but please understand this was done after much reflection, after much thought. And the goal again was to try to keep the tax rate as low as possible. Because keep in mind, had we not made these tax cuts, the tax increase would be in the vicinity of 8 or 9%, which is something we could not fathom. En termes des dépenses de services de dette et coûts de financement, alors ici encore, on a vu une augmentation d'à peu près 9,22%. Et la raison principale, c'est en termes de remboursement du capital et le paiement d'intérêts. In terms of other expenses or other appropriations, I would say the biggest change here, the biggest issue here was in 2023, we used $2.1 million from the cumulative surplus. This was also something that we reflected long and hard on. The reasoning was in 2023, on top of the increase in the agglomeration quote-par, we also were paying in terms of the deficit from earlier years, which was significant. So as a one-time occurrence, we took amounts from the surplus. And this, I should say, was money that we'd actually received from the provincial government to cover the effects of COVID. And so some of those payments were related to deficits of the agglomeration during the COVID pandemic years. Je vais essayer de faire un peu plus vite. I'll try to go a bit faster. C'est un sommaire de la quote-part pour l'agglomération. Alors, on peut voir le quote-part en général. Il y a une augmentation de 3,39%. Si on inclut l'alimentation en termes de l'eau potable, c'est une augmentation de 3,5%. So now in terms of total expenses, so we could see the breakdown, and I'll show a pie chart, which on peut voir en termes de dépenses. Il y a celle qui est le plus grande, c'est la quote-part d'agglomération. On peut voir l'administration, protection civile, travaux publics, etc. en termes de dépenses pour le budget de l'année. So in terms of operating budget summary, so we can see the total revenues, expenses, and again, we factor in the amount for the agglomeration at about 35 million for a total in terms of expenses of $88,975,250 for the year. Maintenant, juste un sommaire des taxes foncières et réserves pour l'eau et la voirie. So this year, so again, we have the 3 taxes or 3 rates. We have the residential tax rate in terms of residential properties, which includes the water, and we have the water reserve and the road reserve. Apartment 6+, which has also water and road, and vacant land as well, which has a road reserve, although the vacant land, there's no water reserve fee for this. So you can see these, and this will all be again included on the website. And you could see the rates are actually down for the year. Maintenant, on peut voir pour les propriétés, les taux de taxes foncières pour les propriétés non résidentielles. Et ce qu'on a fait il y a quelques années, on a fait des sous-catégories. Il y a le set de référence, il y a celle pour les centres commerciaux, les immeubles de bureaux et le chemin de fer. Et on peut voir tous les taux ici. In terms of the capital investment 5-year plan, again, we are adopting the plan for 2024 to 2028, but the focus for today will be on the priorities for the current year, for 2024. So we can see, alors on peut voir divisé entre l'année 2024 et 2028 dans les catégories, les infrastructures, les immeubles, amélioration locale, véhicules. Pour le moment, ce qu'on peut voir en dessous, c'est le financement. Les subventions gouvernementales, on a juste certains montants ici parce que le nouveau subvention tech va seulement commencer en 2024. Alors, on ne sait pas encore tous les moyens et tous les montants, mais on espère que ça serait beaucoup plus élevé, mais on va avoir plus de nouvelles dans l'année 2024. So some of the priorities in terms of the capital investment projects for 2024. So we have the road resurfacing, we have sidewalk repairs, parks and public spaces, the roof reconstruction, which I'll talk a bit more, but just to mention briefly, this is something we are dealing with. However, there is an ongoing lawsuit where the city has sued the builder of the ACC to basically recover those costs. But in the meantime, we have to do the repairs. We don't want the building to sustain any damage, but we're hoping that we'll be able to recover much of those funds from the courts, through the courts. And finally, replenishment of aging vehicles. En termes d'infrastructure de l'eau, c'est la première année du nouveau subvention tech. Et c'est le tech, c'est la taxe d'essence construction du Québec. Oui, merci, j'ai presque oublié. Et c'est la première année, alors on a des services professionnels et pour le but, c'est de commencer la programmation d'une nouvelle subvention. En termes d'infrastructure routière, on va dépenser à peu près 3,5 ou 3,6 millions de dollars. On va faire le resurfage de certaines routes. Ça inclut Avenue Smart, entre Arcadian et les chemins de fer, Arcadian, Westlook entre Wayville et Guelph, Wentworth entre Kildare et Mackle. Et pour cette année, ce qu'on fait, c'est on va faire le resurfage des routes, mais au même moment, on va remplacer les conduites de branchement qui sont en plomb avec les tuyaux en cuivre. Et c'est le but pour l'année prochaine, pour 2024, et pour continuer ça pour 2025. Pour continuer à remplacer les conduits qui sont en plomb. On va aussi reconstruire à peu près 2000 mètres carrés de trottoirs. Et ce qu'on voit dans les dernières 5 années, on a déjà fait à peu près 6300 mètres carrés de trottoirs. Et notre, c'est le coût en termes de ressources, c'est la réparation du passage souterrain de Côte Saint-Luc. Et ça, on va partager avec la ville de Montréal. Cela, c'est une carte. This is a map of the city. And you could see, I know it's not so simple for everyone to catch now, but you can see the different colors for those roads that are done in the last few years. And in gray, you could see the roads that were done from the year 2000, so done over the last few years. So I'd say quite a few that are done, but still work. And I'll just mention the priority over the last few years has been more on the pipes. We've redone or relined about 25% of the pipes. But now that we've done quite a few of the pipes, the goal is to focus more on roads over the upcoming years, while at the same time dealing with the lead service lines. En termes des parcs et espaces publics, on va dépasser à peu près 315 000 $ et c'est financé par le surplus accumulé. Certains exemples sont, par exemple, au parc Belland, des nouvelles fontaines à boire, parc McDowell, réparation de l'équipement de parc, au parc Fletcher, dans District 4, installation d'une salle de bain. C'est quelque chose que les citoyens, les résidents demandaient, ça fait plusieurs années. Au parc Mitchell-Brownstein, des travaux sur les bordures pour aires de jeu. Et dans des autres parcs, remplacement des bancs, des tables, etc. En termes des véhicules, on va remplacer les camions ben à 6 roues qui remplacent un véhicule qui date de 2011. 10 roues avec dumper, un véhicule qui date de 2004, Chargeuse avec souffleuse à neige, un véhicule qui date de 2005. Un véhicule de la sécurité publique qui remplace un véhicule de 2015. Mais juste pour vous dire, le véhicule qu'il remplace, on continue à utiliser. Normalement, les anciens véhicules de la sécurité publique sont utilisés par les travaux publics ou les autres départements de la ville. Just a few other items. So again, these are some building and local improvements. The biggest one, as I mentioned, was the ACC roof reconstruction and building envelope. We're also doing some pool air exchange upgrades, and this is something we've actually been talking about for a few years. New benches for the outdoor pool, City Hall, library retaining wall and driveway, replacement of the panel, existing electrical panel at the garage, and the backstop for the Pierre-Élie Trudeau Park. En termes des autres travaux, et ces projets sont financés par le fonds de roulement ou le Working Fund. C'est remplacement des systèmes de caméras et c'est quelque chose qu'on fait chaque année, les ordinateurs, modernisation de la salle de serveur, en termes de mobilier, certains dans la bibliothèque, remplacement de la pompe de la piscine, certains tapis d'hiver, les terrains de tennis, la machine à rouleau et un système de triple bin, c'est un système de recyclage des déchets et des composts. Et je pense que c'est fini. So I'll pause here and we're just checking the time. We're just ahead of the hour, which was my goal. I'll just check if there are any questions in the room. All right, not seeing any. I'll continue. So I guess, well, maybe just before I continue, I'll just take a moment. Just want to take a moment to thank André Raffolsi, notre trésorier, un grand merci. I want to also thank Angela Marino, our past treasurer, who I know is still supporting us and working as our assistant treasurer and helping in IT. I want to thank Maître Schechter, our city manager. I want to thank all the directors. Hold on. Did I stop sharing, by the way? Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. So I would say, this, I'll just reiterate before we move to the official adoption. This was, I would say, in my 18 years as a councillor, this was the hardest budget to do. This was the most difficult in that we were dealing with mostly factors beyond our control in terms of the interest rates, in terms of sales, in terms of homes, the agglomeration, inflation, which made it more complicated. The goal was to find ways to save some money sustainably. What we realized we'd done in the past, in certain years, we made some cuts and then we reinstated them the following year, and which is why we end up in a situation like this. So we hope that these are sustainable. We understand for residents that are watching this, you may be upset and thinking, well, but I got used to playing pickleball and not having to pay, or using or certain services where you had smaller fees and the fees are larger. Again, every decision we made was not taken lightly. The goal was to find the best way to do this and balance it out. And we hope whether you agree or disagree, you understand the motivation, and the goal was ultimately to find the best way. And I'll just use an analogy from the mayor. As mentioned, when times are a bit tough, instead of maybe going on a bigger vacation, you'll go on a smaller one. Rather than going out of town, you'll maybe just on a lengthy vacation, just go up north for the day or hang out in the city. And it's something we tried to do this year and keep that in mind. And like I said, if it meant not having fireworks or a drone show and means having a laser show instead, or instead of having a band to have a DJ, that'll save us about $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. Well, then that's what we're going to try to do. And again, the goal is to make sure to continue to meet the needs of the residents. So with that, I'll move for adoption of the budget. Just give me 1 second. So I'll move the item. Be it resolved that the Côte Saint-Luc City Council hereby adopts the 2024 operating budget as follows. Revenues of $88,975,250 and expenses and appropriations also of $88,975,250 for a balanced budget, hereby annexed to the minutes to form an integral part of said document entitled Appendix 1. I'll ask for a seconder. So Councillor Schuster, any comments from the councillors? Councillor Cohn?
I just want to publicly, I did it before, but I want to publicly, first of all, commend you for an excellent bilingual presentation. Very thorough. I want to thank our new treasurer who came to us with experience and it shows. And to our departing treasurer, Mr. Marino, they were a really great tag team. And as I've been telling many of my residents this week, and as I wrote on my blog, this was not an easy exercise for anybody. And I've already received, some people who've read the blog, who've come to me with concerns about the tax increase. And I think I'm glad that all of this is going to be published on the web. I think everybody who has a complaint needs to study it and needs to see that we really thoroughly looked at every single solitary penny in our city. And for people who came to me and said, well, you have enough money, or why are you cutting this, or why are you cutting that? Nothing is, everything was done, bring it down to the lowest possible number. And as I said, there's what, $1 million in cuts, $500,000 in good to have, and $500,000 in staffing. So I'm proud to be a member of this council. We're a united council. We stood by our administration. We worked as a team, and let's hope for a better year. Let's hope Mr. Tiff Macklin, the chair of the Bank of Canada, is a little bit more concerned with the bottom line, and let's hope that we do something with that agglomeration council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cohn. Next, Councillor Sabag.
Thank you. So, you started mentioning that this was one of the hardest budgets to go through since you got elected. And it was long nights. It was a lot of debates. And as Councillor Cohen mentioned, we did go through a fine comb to make sure that we have all the elements on the table to make the right decisions. I think, most residents would appreciate what we do and how we did it. There could still be more that we can do, I believe, to bring this into a matter where we show complete efficiency for our residents. So I've voiced it before, I'll voice it again. I will vote in favor of the budget, obviously. But I do think this was a very, very difficult exercise as we move forward. There's going to be quite a bit of things that we highlighted that we're going to be continuing to highlight throughout the next budgets and how we manage the city going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sabag. Councillor Schuster.
Thank you, Councillor Erdely. I just wanted to make the comment, after having worked in the nonprofit sector for more than 20 years, that when times are tough, you cut with a scalpel and not with an axe. That's the goal, to really cut where people won't feel it so much. And I think we've managed to achieve that with adjusting, the schedule of our facilities and trying to scale back on things or substitute other things so that people don't lose that quality of life and the fun times and the education and entertainment that we have in Côte Saint-Luc, particularly with recreation and library and other services. So I just wanted to express that, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schuster. Any other comments? Not hearing any. I'll move to a vote. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carried unanimously. And I'll move now to the capital projects. Be it resolved that Côte Saint-Luc City Council hereby accepts and adopts the 3-year capital expenditure plan for the 2024 to 2028 years, totaling $48,976,700 plus applicable taxes, hereby annexed to the minutes to form an integral part of said document entitled Appendix 2. Last from a seconder, Councillor Azarad. I'll just mention really briefly to clarify. So the total is 48 million, but just note that only 6 million of that is for the upcoming year. And note that we will make adjustments and modifications to the following year, but the goal is to try to plan. Oh, and actually I just noticed, sorry, I just caught a typo. Did I say a 3-year plan? Yeah, so it should just, the motion should say 5-year, not 3-year. I just caught that as I was reading it again. But anyway, the point is that even though we're adopting it, we're really only, we'll be focusing, of course, on the projects for next year. And of course, next year, we'll be adopting the 2025 to 2029 plan. Any other counselors who would like to make a comment on the capital projects? All right, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carried unanimously. And now I'll ask Councillor Kajewski to move to adjourn. We'll take a 2-minute pause and then we'll begin the 7 p.m. meeting, which we're just a few minutes late. So I'll ask Councillor Kajewski, please go ahead.
So moved. I move to adjourn.
All right, seconder, Councillor Schuster, all in favor? All right, thank you. We are adjourned. We'll adjourn for 2 minutes and then reconvene for the 7 p.m. meeting. Thank you. Merci.